Hi, this is Adam. This is my third video that I've made for BookTube. And today what I would like to do is I would like to discuss my journey reading the Pulitzer Prize winning novels. So I would like to read all the novels that have won the Pulitzer Prize Award for Fiction. This began back in 1918. The first winner was a novel called His Family. And every year, the Pulitzer Committee awards a prize for the best work of fiction. This includes both novels and short stories. And so there have been nearly 100 winners over the years. Some years they don't award a winner actually. But I began my journey on reading all the Pulitzer Prize winning novels. And I thought what I would do in making this video is I would talk about the ones that I've read in turn. And I think I'd like to talk about 3 novels per video to see how, well, we'll see how that works out. But up to this date, I have read 23 of the novels. So as I'm going along, I'd like to make these videos to just share my thoughts and feelings about them and see if you have, so that we can engage in a dialogue and have some discussion about some works of literary merit in U.S. history. And let's go ahead and get started. And the first novel that I read in my Pulitzer journey was back when I was in high school, actually. And this was in the late 1980s when I read this book for the first time. Very famous Pulitzer Prize winner. It's called To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. This book was written in 1961. I read it my junior year in high school for my English literature class. Well, my English class, it was literature. I didn't mean to confuse you by saying that it was a work of English literature. It's a work of literature, and I read it in my English class. And then I reread it again about 10 years ago, just to see if it had held up over the years. And I have to say that it's a very enjoyable novel. Harper Lee is a very good writer, and I think that she deserves the accolades that she's gotten over the years. She only wrote this book, and then, of course, after her death, they published Go Set a Watchman, the sequel or prequel in some ways to Kill a Mockingbird. I have not read Go Set a Watchman. I have only read this one so far. So this is a book about, and there won't be any major plot spoilers in any of these book summaries. I'll just give you a little bit of background information and then have some discussion about my feelings about the book. This book is about children growing up in the United States during in the southern United States during the Great Depression. And so the main character is a young girl named Jean Louise Finch, who goes by the name Scout. And then she has a brother whose name is Jim, an older brother whose name is Jim. I believe he's about 13, and I want to say Scout maybe 8. And another main character in the story is a cousin named Dill, who often comes to visit during the summer. And so they have many misadventures throughout the story, and we get to learn much more about them in their relationship with their father, whose name is Atticus. And they call him Atticus. They don't call him father. They call him Atticus. That's just kind of the way that they've been raised, who is a lawyer in the town that they live in Alabama. So we learn a lot about the Depression and how it affects the people living in Alabama. We learn a lot about race relations in this book. We learn a lot about the father's relationship to his children and the way that he cares for his children. It's a lovely story. I really enjoyed this, reading this book, because it tells so much about childhood and the way that we as children view our parents. In this case, the only parent that they have, because their mother has died. And so we see this Scout as she views her father, and she begins, as she's coming of age, she begins to understand her father more and more, and she begins to understand how the world works through the eyes of seeing events that take place because of her father. The relationships are key in this story. Scout and Jim, the brother and the sister, have a really loving, caring relationship. So we see how a brother and sister really care for each other and watch out for each other. We learn about family and family relationships. We learn about race a lot in this book, as race is a big part of To Kill a Mockingbird. We also learn about how there is disparity, that the way the races are treated in the South in the 1930s. This forms a big part of the book. And so as we get into the second half of the novel, the case of a man that Atticus is defending, his name is Tom Robinson, who has been accused of raping a white woman. One of the things that impresses me about how Harper Lee writes this book is she handles these sensitive topics of racism and rape of a female. She handles them in a very sensitive and delicate manner. And so this book is assigned oftentimes in schools, usually in high school, but I've heard stories of some middle school students reading this as well. And so these are very difficult matters to share with an audience because they evoke so much emotion and feeling. And so Harper Lee, for the most part, does this very, very sensitively and very, very thoughtfully. One thing that I would like to address in reading this book, although I have great fondness for this book, I know that there have been people who I've heard of lately who have claimed that To Kill a Mockingbird is actually a book that is a racist. It's a racist book, and this has been gaining a little bit more attention lately because of the Black Lives Matter movement and the way that people view, looking back at Harper Lee, that they say that she could have done more with her book. She could have made this more of an anti-racial a book, and also the character of Atticus Finch, they say, is viewed as a white savior, and so he's almost made out to be a perfect character, and he's a white savior. I think these criticisms of the book are valid. I certainly believe that these ideas should be discussed. They should be encouraged to talk about the good and the bad in the novel, and so I don't particularly see it being an anti-racial. I don't see it being a book that promotes racism or promotes the poor treatment of other people. I certainly don't dismiss that theory, but this book was written in 1960. It won the Pulitzer Prize in 1961. It's very much a book of its time, and so. But I think that Harper Lee treats the subject in a very sensitive manner, in the way that she has the characters interact with each other, in the way that she has them, show who they are as people at that time and in that place, both the good and the bad. I think that ultimately the humanity of the book is what comes across most for me, and just the tenderness and the gentleness in the book is, I think, the main thing that comes across for me. Read a short passage that shows Scout and Jim's views on who their father was and how they're beginning to see their father, and this is about a little bit more than halfway through the book. I was beginning to notice a subtle change in my father these days that came out when he talked with Aunt Alexandra. It was a quiet digging in, never outright irritation. There was faint starchiness in his voice when he said, "Anything fit to say at the table is fit to say in front of Calpurnia." Calpurnia is their black servant who helps out around the house and has been with the family even before Scout was born. She knows what she means to this family. I don't think it's a good habit, Atticus is and Alexandra talking. It encourages them. You know how they talk among themselves. Everything that happens in the town's out to the quarters before sundown. My father put down his knife. I don't know any law that says they can't talk. Maybe if we didn't give them so much to talk about, they'd be quiet. Why don't you drink your coffee, Scout? I was playing in it with a spoon. I thought Mrs. Cunningham was a friend of ours, or Mr. Cunningham rather was a friend of ours. You told me a long time ago he was. He still is. But last night he wanted to hurt you. Atticus placed his fork beside his knife and pushed his plate aside. Mr. Cunningham's basically a good man, he said. He just has his blind spots along with the rest of us. Jim spoke. Don't call that a blind spot. He'd have killed you last night when he first went there. You might have hurt me a little, Atticus conceded. But son, you'll understand folks a little bit better when you're older. A mob's always made up of people, no matter what. Mr. Cunningham was part of a mob last night, but he was still a man. Every mob in every little southern town is always made up of people, you know. Doesn't say much for them, does it? I'll say not, said Jim. So it took an 8-year-old child to bring them to their senses, didn't it, said Atticus. That proves something, that a gang of wild animals can be stopped simply because they're still human. Maybe we need a police force of children. You children last night made Walter Cunningham stand in my shoes for a minute. That was enough. So overall, I'd say it's, of the 23 books that I've read in this Pulitzer journey, I'd say that this is, at this point, probably my favorite one, just for the touching humanity that comes across in this book, and just the way that people learn lessons, good life lessons from other people, and they grow closer because of the lessons that they've learned. The second book I'd like to talk about in this Pulitzer journey that I read, and I read this book way back. There was a long gap when I was in high school and college. I didn't read a lot of Pulitzer fiction because I was so busy with my schoolwork. But after I became an adult and I started, I was a teacher, I started reading some other Pulitzer Prize winning novels. And so the next one is The Road by Cormac McCarthy, my second Pulitzer Prize winning novel that I read. This won the Pulitzer Prize in 2007. I read it a couple years later in 2009. So this book, The Road, is a book about post-apocalyptic America. It centers on a father and his young son. The son, I believe, is about 5 years old, maybe a little bit older than that. Well, between 5 and 8, anyways. And so, Cormac McCarthy doesn't explain what happened that caused the apocalypse in America. It's just we know that there is an apocalypse and the world is very, very bleak. People are basically living in a lawless society where each person looks out for themselves. Each person is responsible for their own safety and security. There's no law force. There's no government. People are just trying to survive, and it's a very harrowing and bleak story of survival. And so the two main characters, the father and the son, and by the way, they don't have names. They're not given any names in the story. They're just called the man and the boy. And we find out as we read along a little bit further, of course, that at one time the man was married, and we can see several times throughout the story that he flashes back to remember his wife. And what happens with his wife is a big part of the story, and how he regrets maybe some of the interactions that he had with his wife. But anyways, getting back to the plot of this story, it is very bleak. The narrative is very simple. One of the interesting things about McCarthy in this book is that he doesn't use a lot of proper quotations or punctuations when he's describing the dialogue between the characters. It just comes across as very bare and very simplistic. It's each man for himself in this world, this post-apocalyptic world, and survival is the main key. And we see what this story, at the heart of this story, is the love between the father and the son. And because they're having to do harrowing things and they're having to travel so much to keep themselves safe, where food is very, very scarce, throughout this story, the man and the boy are almost always cold and hungry. And so they just basically have this cart that they push around that has their few possessions in it, and they move from place to place just so that other people don't catch up to them. There are reports of instances of cannibalism in this story. There's some violence when the man and the boy encounter some of the other people who have survived a nuclear winter or whatever happened that caused this to become a post-apocalyptic situation. It's a really harrowing novel, but it's very easy to read, and I got through it in less than a week, I believe, and I definitely would encourage you to read it if you haven't done so already. I'm going to read you just a little passage in The Road just so you can kind of see what some of the way that McCarthy writes. And so the boy and his father are talking about their situation and what might happen in the future, and just the preparedness that the father and the son are hoping comes. Listen to the dialogue and the sparse writing that McCarthy has. They crawled slowly through the leaves towards what looked like lower ground. He lay listening, holding the boy. He could hear them in the road talking. Voice of a woman. Then he heard them in the dry leaves. He took the boy's hand and pushed the revolver into it. "Take it," he whispered, "take it." The boy was terrified. He put his arm around him and held him, his body so thin. "Don't be afraid," he said. "If they find you, you are going to have to do it. Do you understand? Shh, no crying. Do you hear me? You know how to do it. You put it in your mouth and point it up. Do it quick and hard. Do you understand? Stop crying. Do you understand?" "I think so." "No. Do you understand?" "Yes." Say, yes, I do, Papa. Yes, I do, Papa. He looked down at him. All he saw was terror. He took the gun from him. No, you don't, he said. I don't know what to do, Papa. I don't know what to do. Where will you be? It's okay. I don't know what to do. Shh, I'm right here. I won't leave you. You promise? Yes, I promise. I was going to run to try and lead them away, but I can't leave you. Papa, shh, stay down. I'm so scared. In this book, we see that the father and the son, the man and the boy, have to take drastic measures to be prepared for whatever eventualities may come their way. And there's, the horrific stories of humans eating other humans just to have food to survive, and a very bleak world that they live in. When I read The Road back in 2009, I didn't have sons of my own. Since 2009, I now have two sons, and I think if I was to reread it, I think the love that I have for my boys would make me even feel more emotional about this book, because basically The Road is a novel about a man's relationship to his son, and how he basically, the only thing that matters to him is protecting his son and keeping his son alive. And the son's world is his father, and just clinging to that one thing and realizing that this one thing is going to be your means to getting through the day. But yeah, so a sparse story, a very, very powerful story though. So far out of the 23 books that I read, because it's a little bit bleak, I didn't rate it as high. There is optimism in parts in the book. I'm not going to say too much about that, where the optimism comes from, or if it has an optimistic ending. I won't say that, but I rated it at 18 out of the 23 Pulitzers that I've read so far, just because it's a little more bleak, but still very powerful story. Highly recommending you read it if you are interested in that type of literature. The last book I'm going to talk about in my Pulitzer journey, the third book that I read in my Pulitzer journey so far, is a book called Olive Kitteridge. It was written by Elizabeth Strout. It was written in 2000. Well, it was written in 2008. It won a Pulitzer in 2009. And I read this book. It won in 2009, and I read it the very next year in 2010. So I read it shortly after reading The Road. So Olive Kitteridge is an interesting story. It's a lot different than The Road, I'll tell you that. And it's different than To Kill a Mockingbird as well. It's a story that's actually 13 short stories combined into one novel, and it doesn't have a continuous narrative theme. Basically what it's about is it's about a town. I believe it's a fictional town in the state of Maine. I think it's called Crosby, Maine, if I remember right. And Olive Kitteridge is one of the main characters in the story. She doesn't appear in all the stories. Sometimes she's just referred to in the stories. Sometimes it's just a brief reference to her, but sometimes she is the main character in each of these 13 short stories. It's a really interesting read. It was the first and only to this point Elizabeth Strout book that I have read. There was, in 2019, there was a sequel that was published to Olive Kitteridge, and I have not read that yet. It's really an interesting book, and the Strout, I really think, is a very talented and gifted writer. I enjoyed reading this. I read this very quickly. It was not something that was difficult to read. It held my interest. There's a lot of things going on in this story. The characters spring to life, and boy, they have a lot of things happening to them. So there's tales of family strife. There's tales of what happens, when people get older in their life. Is life worth living as you get older? Not having the money to support yourself the way that you need to. Your marriage may be up and down. Rocky situations in marriage. There's divorce. There's remarriage. There's people having affairs with other people. So there's a lot of familial drama in Olive Kitteridge, and so it's a very realistic story in that sense. It examines people, warts and all, and it doesn't try to set any ideal way that people should behave. It just talks about the way they actually do behave. So again, like I said, it's 13 stories. Some of the stories are better than others, of course. Whenever you have a kind of a collection of stories, there's always going to be some that you favor more than others. I think if I had to say what my favorite story in the whole collection was, kind of about midway through, there's a story that's called A Different Road. And so Olive and her husband, Henry, they go into a hospital, and they're waiting in the hospital. Olive is feeling a little bit under the weather, so they just are going to give her a checkup to make sure that she's okay. And while they're in the waiting room, there's two men who break into the hospital, and they're looking for drugs, and so they believe they can find some drugs in the hospital. So it's almost like they're having a hold-up situation at the hospital, and so there's a lot of waiting that goes on. Olive is waiting through this situation. She's talking to her husband, and there's a nurse that comes in, and so one of the things that happens is the nurse starts praying, and so Olive kind of chastises the nurse for her praying at such a time. And then Henry kind of defends the nurse, and so there's a little bit of a quarrel between Olive and Henry and the nurse. And so some interesting things that happen in the story. Just to give you a little bit more insight into one of the things I really like about Strout as a writer, she doesn't try and portray Olive Kitteridge to be this heroic woman. She's just portraying this lady. By the way, I should mention that Olive was a math teacher before, but she's retired from that now. She's older, and so she's retired from being a math teacher. I believe, if I remember right, it was a high school math teacher. Or it might have been a middle school math teacher. But she's retired, and so they have a son. Henry and Olive have a son named Christopher. And in one of the stories, Christopher actually gets married to this lady named Sue. And so Sue doesn't necessarily like her new mother-in-law. And so at the wedding, Olive happens to overhear her new daughter-in-law, Sue, talking to some of her friends, and she's making fun of the way Olive has dressed for the wedding. She's kind of making fun of her dress. And so Olive can't believe that she's taken back that her daughter-in-law would say these kind of things. And so Olive, in order to get revenge, goes over to where Sue's other clothes are that she's going to change into later after the wedding is over, and she kind of takes the clothes and she ruins the clothes. And this is her way of getting a little bit of revenge on Sue for saying insulting things and making fun of her and mocking the way that she dressed at the wedding. So these are the kind of stories that exist in Olive Kitteridge. And so just to give you another little brief window into this story, Olive, in one of the stories, it's called Incoming Tide, I believe. Olive is kind of down at the coast, and she notices that one of her former students is sitting in a car. And so he looks a little gloomy, so she goes up to him and she just starts talking to him while he's sitting in the car. And as it turns out, Olive doesn't know this, but as it turns out, he was the student was of Olive, her former student, was seriously pondering committing suicide. And it just so happens that Olive, kind of by recognizing him and talking with him and acknowledging him, he changes his mind. So just these little things that happen in the story, we see Olive's good side and we see her not so good side. And Elizabeth Strout portrays her just as she is. And all these other characters, we just see them living in a very realistic manner. I rated this my 10th favorite of the Newberries that I've read so far. I think the reason I rated it so much higher than The Road, and again, I like The Road. I like most of the Pulitzers that I've read so far for the most part. I like this one just because of the different variety and just kind of the slice of life vignettes that you see in Olive Kitteridge. Read a little bit of a brief excerpt from Olive Kitteridge. This is from the story that I was telling you about, A Different Road, the one that's set in the hospital where the two men break in. And while it had been a really ghastly blow for the Kitteridges to have Christopher so suddenly uprooted by his pushy new wife after they had planned on him living nearby and raising a family, Olive had pictured teaching his future children how to plant bulbs. While it had certainly been a blow to have this dream disintegrate, the fact that Bill and Bunny had their grandchildren right next door and the grandchildren were spiteful was a source of unspoken comfort to the Kitteridges. In fact, the Newtons told a story that night about how their grandson had told Bunny just last week, "You may be my grandmother, but that doesn't mean I have to love you, you know." It was a frightful thing. Who would expect such a thing? Bunny's eyes had glistened in the telling of this. Olive and Henry did what they could, shaking their heads, saying what a shame that it was that Eddie essentially trained the children to say those things under the guise of expressing themselves. "Well, Karen's responsible too," Bill said gravely, and Olive and Henry murmured, "Well, sure, that was true." So again, it's really realistic about how people live and about the troubles that they have in relating to each other with their family and getting through life. So I really enjoyed Olive Kitteridge, and I would like to read some more Strout again in the future. Okay, those are my 3 Pulitzer books that I've read in order so far. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. I would also encourage you to tell me what your Pulitzer favorites are, if you've read any so far. If you've liked this video and you want me to continue, I plan on just making a video about each of the 3 Pulitzer books. It seems like this is a pretty appropriate amount of books to talk about in this length of a video. Just, you know, if you'd like me to continue going on my journey. Like I said, I've read 23 of the books so far. My goal is to finish the whole entire list eventually, and to just share with you my journey about reading these Pulitzer Prize winning books and some of the ideas I have about reading these Pulitzer books and what I think. So I'd love to hear some of your comments, open up a dialogue, get some discussion down below in the comment section. You can watch the other videos that I posted on YouTube, and I appreciate you sticking with me through this video. Thanks a lot. Have a good day.